How's it going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to my vlog. Alright, okay, so this time we're going to be talking about timelines. So at the end of the last one, I wasn't completely sure where I was going to be going with this, but I think I've got sort of a place to start. So I think, as I've mentioned before, I do write for a multiverse. So obviously there is various different timelines converging to create different worlds and different realities and various things like that, but there are certain things and certain events which sort of happen sort of consistently. And I think I've also mentioned before that I have started creating a multiverse timeline, which sort of shows some various events and from across different realities and different worlds. But to a degree, I kind of want to sort of maybe talk about why it's important to me to sort of have that sort of structure going on in the background. Even if I'm not necessarily following it as tightly as I should, I think it's important to sort of be kind of aware of certain events which affect all the realities and certain events which maybe only affect one, two realities or half a dozen realities. I think it's very important to sort of have in your mind exactly what's gone on before, so that you can move forward and continue forward. So some of the stories that I have written, the sort of more historical ones, might be focused on events that have affected multiple realities and multiple timelines. I'm not necessarily sure whether it's happened in one reality and then everything is sort of split off and branched off from there, or whether it's something that's a very similar event has happened across. It depends on the event. It very much depends on the event that you're talking about. I mean, there are certain things that are obviously true for everything, like the way the multiverse began is going to be true for everything because it was created because of what happened to the original reality. And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, you need to check out some of my earlier blogs which cover the multiverse and how the multiverse began. Specifically pay attention to the ones on the mistresses, I think, and the multiverse, the mistresses in the multiverse. Those ones in particular might be a good place to start to know where I'm going or what I'm talking about there. Um, but yeah, no, the idea being that the multiverse was created in the aftermath of the destruction of the original universe, though that's going to be true no matter what reality you're in or what plane you're on, because that is a fixed event. That is the event from which everything has split off and everything has channeled off. Like certain gods are only going to be relevant and only appear in certain realities because they are kind of one-off-ish and they're not necessarily above the multiverse as a whole, but they're sort of almost separate from it. They exist within their own realm or plane, and they have importance maybe across the multiverse, but there's only necessarily one version of them. So things like that can, make things a little bit messy, especially when you have the immortal gods Perry and too, who you have to kind of work out from a timeline sense. Are they an event which occurred in one timeline, and that because that happened in that one timeline and they ascended to godhood, they then affect multiple timelines, or has it happened across, or not multiple timelines, multiple realities, or has that event happened in multiple realities and their death has kind of converged them all together, mushing them into a singular entity when they began as multiple entities. And it's things like that that you have to kind of figure and work out when you're dealing with a very complex multiverse system for which certain things are true across the board, but can only be true across the board if certain other things are true across the board, and it's like working out, which bit of or which version of a particular thing has kind of occurred. So timeline wise, the Circle of Six, there are certain characters that have various versions of themselves which have appeared in various stories. And some of those, the other versions of them don't necessarily exist anymore because they've kind of merged together. So I have dealt with the concept of a being who originally there were 6 versions of. Through certain events, the 6 versions have, or not necessarily all 6 of the versions have, but some of the versions have either died off or been destroyed or whatever, and the remnants of those have come together to form a being, or 2 or 3 of those have come together to form a singular being because that was a good way of ensuring that they would exist for longer. I think one in particular who does appear in the Tales saga, for whom this is true, probably started off as 6 completely different beings and then merged together into one singular being because of various events that sort of happened. I touched a little bit on that, or lifted on the idea that he wasn't necessarily the original version, or wasn't necessarily the version that belonged to the reality that he's in, or there's a possibility that there are other bits in him that weren't necessarily in him previously, without necessarily saying, that's definitely what happened, because I was sort of toying with lots of things, and the story was getting very complicated, and I was kind of like, I need to try to make it as straightforward as possible. Whereas another one of the characters that do appear, there are other versions of this character. It is expressly said there are other versions of this character, but we're only focused on this particular version of this character. So that kind of makes more sense because that's a version of somebody who was born in the right point at that time, or born around that point, and existed around that point in the timeline, whereas the other characters from a much older point in time, and in order to survive, had to merge together in order to sort of keep going. So it's, when you're sort of dealing with a very complex multiverse where you've got characters that might have originally had multiple versions but now might only have 1 or 2 versions, you've got to kind of figure out, well, what has changed? Why has that happened? And, can you cleanly do it? Can you sort of go, no, actually there are still multiple versions of this character, we're just dealing with this one version of this character? Or is there one version of this character because the previous versions of the character either stopped existing or have merged into what is remaining? And that can be quite challenging when you're, as I said, dealing with a multiverse timeline, because you're constantly trying to sort of figure out, is this event true across multiple, or is it true within this singular? How complicated or straightforward does this need to be in order to get it to work? Do I want there to be multiple versions of this one particular character, or actually is this now just an amalgamation? And as I said, I think the one in the Tales that I'm thinking of, I think he does state at one point that he's an amalgamation. I'm not sure if he uses those words exactly, but I think he very heavily implies that at one point he was lots of different beings and now he's 1, maybe 2. I think there's probably a second one, but then that second one is, he's not part of the Circle 6 anyway, so sort of a different character. It's not very complicated and messy. It really is. But that's kind of part of the fun of creating a multiverse timeline as well. It's having all of these possibilities and all of these variations and trying to sort of juggle so many different strands and so many different ways of thinking about life in the world and how the world works, and it's enjoyable. It's messy, but it's enjoyable. And I'm not sure how much timeline talk I've actually done in this, and whether it's kind of been more babbling about multiverses and trying to keep multiverses straight. And hopefully it's been sort of interesting, and that you're taking something away from this, but Right, anyway, next time we are going to have another fan flu. I've not had one for a little while. I really would like to do another one. Not sure what the next fan flu is necessarily going to be about, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So yeah, next time we are doing another fan flu, and I hopefully will be a bit more coherent in that one. We'll see. But until next time, see ya.
If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to check out some of my others, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. See ya!